Thank you. Hi, this is Fiona Rattray. For those of you who don't know me, I work for Putnam Independent Living Services, which is a satellite of Westchester Independent Living Centre. I am the parent to two children with autism. One is 24, one is 16. I'm also a former special ed teacher, so one way or another, I've been involved with working with people with disabilities for a long time. Renee?
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Renee Flanger-Brenner. I work for the Resource Center for Accessible Living. It's the Independent Living Center that's in Ulster County, New York. I'm the special education advocate. I'm a mom of 4 adult children, 2 who had IEPs, 1 a 504, and I've been advocating for at least 25 years and have a background in early childhood education and music therapy and special ed.
Thanks, Renee. We're going to keep our screens off today because Renee's computer's playing up somewhat and it looks like
wonky.
It's like a
looks
bad
like
1980s video. Yeah. So in the interest of balance, we're both keeping our videos off. So should we get started, Renee?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm just going to move. I've got a bar in my way here. Okay, so transition's a scary thing for all of us. I don't know if you can remember yourself when you transitioned from maybe preschool into kindergarten or from elementary to middle school. I certainly remember all the what we call queen bees and wannabes in middle school and all the social pressures of that. And then you got high school and the stress of things getting rather serious and the formal exams. So for all parents, it's stressful when we come to these times of transition. But I think for parents of children with disabilities, there's just that extra layer or several layers for some of us of worry. What if services change? Will the other children be friendly towards my child? How will he or she manage in this new environment? And these are just a couple of questions. There's a whole lot more that are going to be plaguing us as we anticipate this transition. And I just want to acknowledge the fact, and this is, I'm not going to read this out loud, you can read it yourselves, but it's just, we are dealing with something more. I'm sure a lot of you out there have had that thing where you're maybe talking about a challenge or a struggle that your child is facing, and your friend with your neurotypical child or their physically functioning child says, oh yeah, my child has to deal with that too. And you're thinking, yeah, I know that, but really you don't get it. And people don't get it. And because people don't get it, there are quite a few barriers in our way. There are things that we're going to have to maybe ask about and challenge that other parents don't have to look into. They can just sort of get on with the process.
And I want to just say that, recognizing too that you're not alone. So it's important that you do reach out to any of the resources that we will be providing at the end of this workshop. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.
So the purpose of this webinar is really to get you thinking and understanding how best to prepare for your child's upcoming transition. And since every child is different, we can't address every possible scenario, obviously. But hopefully what we will do is give you some food for thought and help get you on the right track in terms of thinking about the things you need to think about and the questions that you need to ask. And we'll be looking at these 3 transitions. So the transition to kindergarten, the transition to middle school, and the transition to high school. For most kids, that's going to be 4 to 5, 11 to 12, and 14 to 15. But obviously there are some school districts where those transitions take place at different times, or they might have, I know certainly in the school district I live in, there are some intermediate schools. So children move from into a school where I think they are for just 2 years before they go into the upper elementary, for example.
So I had a parent today call me and was going to be transitioning to kindergarten. And this slide here was exactly that. Parents often ask, my child might not be ready for kindergarten, what do I do? And most times parents themselves are not ready because they often feel that they're not prepared because they don't have the answers. And it's a new system, a new school, new people, new administrators. So it's just as much of a transition for your child as it is for you.
Yeah, and I think this is, some of us look forward to that change. We want to see our children moving on, and some of us absolutely dread it. But either way, it really pays to have as much information and understanding as possible so that you can help your child make that successful transition, and so that you know what you need to share as well with the school district. So we're going to, I think we've got a slide missing here, Renee. There should have been a slide. Sorry?
No, I'm sorry. No, that's the next slide I have.
Okay, I thought we had a list of the areas we were going to cover, but never mind, we'll just move straight in. So one of the things you need to be aware of at the different stages is the expectations for your children. What are they looking for your child to be able to do by the time they get into kindergarten? And there's lots of lists out there online. We've just taken the things that sort of came up again and again. So obvious things like recognizing naming the letters of the alphabet, determining hand dominance, using scissors, etc., etc. And again, I won't go through the whole list, but you can see here that there's a few skills there that your child is expected to have. So one of the things that you can be doing by way of preparation is looking at lists like these and comparing them with where your child is at. And if there are items on these lists that come up again and again and again, and they're things that your child has not mastered yet, then that's something that you will need to be having a discussion with the district about. Renee, did you want to say anything more about this at this point?
Yes, I do. And don't be the only one to ask those questions and look for those answers. If your child is in a preschool, whether it be a preschool special ed program, or you have your child in a private preschool or daycare center, really have conversations with the staff people there and ask what their children are, your child is doing there, what their strengths are, and what areas they might need support. And please don't get overwhelmed if your child's not able to do all this stuff here, because kindergarten is not a mandatory grade, but it is a place where children are going to be starting to do this here. So if your child's not doing all this, they're going to be making sure that they're going to support them in some way, shape, or form.
Thanks, Renee. And then moving on to the expectations for children as they move into middle school. And these are slightly more abstract, if you like. So by this stage, they're expected to be able to work in teams and negotiate conflicts. So in a team situation, to do that back and forth and decide who's going to be the leader and listen to each other. They need to be taking some responsibility at this point for monitoring and deciding how they're going to do their homework, monitoring their grades, starting to self-advocate for themselves. If they haven't already started going into CSE meetings in elementary school, then you might want to start that process off now and just do a gentle introduction to CSE meetings. They should be able, on the whole, to self-regulate their emotions, cultivate passions and recognize their limitations. So be aware of their own strengths and weaknesses and the fact that both are equally important. And they should be able to make responsible, safe and ethical choices. For example, understanding who friends are and when people are not friends. Again, we are looking at these in terms of where does this chime with where your child's at? Are there areas here where they need work and they need assistance?
And to add some more pressure to you parents when your child transitions to middle school, I also like to say middle school essentials for parents is usually like extra strength Tylenol, or I need to be humorous about that, because this is also the time when most kids, if they haven't already started, will also be hormonal. So that's fun times for everybody. So one of the things I know in most of the school districts in Ulster County is that there's a parent portal, and I think a lot of elementary schools have that as well, and a Google Classroom. So your child, and I apologize, that's my dog in the background, your child is going to be linked via the computer, the tablet, or whatever they're using, and you will be able to have access to all sorts of stuff that their child is doing. So again, being prepared beforehand to know what it is that you need to do and who it is you need to contact if you honestly can't get into the parent portal or the Google Classroom, to have all that set up beforehand.
Another thing you want to bear in mind when your child is going into middle school is if your child is medicated, when puberty kicks in, that can have an impact on the medication. So you want to be aware of that and just preemptive with it. Talk to your PCP or the psychiatrist, whoever's working with your child, so that you can anticipate and head off any problems at the pass in terms of maybe the medications are becoming less effective or they're having different side effects. Just something to be aware of. Moving on to high school. By this
super strength Tylenol here. No, I'm joking.
By this point, a student should be able to create a healthy study environment. So they should have moved away from doing what I'm afraid my son still does, which is sort of lies half prone on the sofa doing his homework. Ideally, they should have some space where they're sitting down and it's dedicated workspace with adequate lighting and space to store all of their stuff. And they should be able to stay on task, stay organized, fight procrastination, develop strong study habits, because remember, for many of these children, not all of them, but quite a lot are going to be going on to higher education. Communication skills and particularly self-advocacy. At this stage, they will be expected to go into CSE meetings. Learning to take some risks, so maybe learning to recognize that you have strengths and limitations, but actually give yourself some opportunities and try some new things out. And then they need to have honed the skills of note-taking, critical thinking, and problem solving by this point. Renee, did you want to add anything on high school skills and habits?
No, and what I want to stress to everybody that we're presenting to you what the expectations are, and also to understand that this is what your child's IEP or 504 is going to be focused around if they need supports in all of these areas during these transitions, and what you should be mindful to ask for at meetings. So because my oldest daughter is totally dependent, all of this other stuff, everything that we're looking at is definitely not anything that she was able to do by herself. So that's why her IEP was for her. And then my other children, obviously they were able to do these things, but they needed different support. So just know that. Yeah. And now we're going to go into, what to expect at each of these transition stages. And just to remember that we're just giving you basic information because we know that the meetings are coming up for next year, and also meetings with guidance counselors for schedules. I'm muting.
Okay, so entering kindergarten, some of the things you need to know. If your child has an IEP in preschool, then there will be a CPSE meeting, and during that CPS meeting, a decision will be made as to whether or not your child is eligible to have an IEP in kindergarten. Generally speaking, if your child is eligible to have an IEP in kindergarten, you will move straight into the CSE meeting once that decision is made. If your child's not eligible, they may be referred to the 504 committee, or there may be some sort of exit strategy for them coming out of IEP services. You need to know that there are deadlines for registration in kindergarten, usually around March. Each district will have its own deadlines. It's important to be aware of those and to try and stick with the deadlines.
So I just want to interject, Fiona, with that, is that if your child has already been part of the Committee on Preschool Special Education, you already registered your child through the school district, that doesn't count. So you have to register your child for kindergarten. So don't neglect that registration. And you can always just call the school district up and ask when the deadline is. Yeah.
You don't want to delay on that. It's not like they're not going to let you in if you register in June, but obviously the sooner your child is registered, the more time the district has to get to know your child and to make sure that they get an appropriate placement. We moved into the district in August, and one of my children was very rapidly placed for obvious reasons, because we didn't get to the districts until mid-August, but it wasn't the appropriate placement for him. So he was basically in the wrong placement for the first 6 weeks. We probably could have avoided that had we moved earlier. So do get those registrations in line with those deadlines. And then once the children have been registered, there will be kindergarten screening. That usually takes place late May, early June. And they're looking at the basic numeracy, literacy skills that the children have to see what their needs are going to be. So they're looking at the needs of the entire grade there. And then, sorry, go on.
And that's okay. And when it comes to the kindergarten, there are some school districts that, because your child was already part of the Committee on Preschool Special Education and has already been evaluated and, in a sense, screened, that might not be necessary. As a parent, you can decide whether or not you want to do that, because I see that also as being an opportunity for staff at that school and for your child to be in that kind of an environment and get some kind of acclimation to it and to see what it's about.
Students. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And also at that point, I would think that's when you need to have your children's dental, medical records, proof of vaccination ready to give to the district. Your dentist, your PCP will know what information the district requires. The districts usually have their own forms, but you do need to have that information handed in. The PCP, for example, will usually do a quick listening test and a quick vision test and that kind of thing. And then during the summer, you will receive supply lists, and they will be quite overwhelming. I would strongly recommend with supply lists that you try to talk to other parents. A good idea if your child is going into kindergarten, by the way, is to try and join the PTA as soon as you can, because you will get information from other parents in the PTA. But the supply lists, some of them, the teachers are quite rigid about sticking to them, and some of them are not. We have cupboards full of books that never got used in our house because we stuck rigidly to the lists and we really didn't need to. So it's worth asking a few questions about that. Then you'll get the classes. Sorry, go on.
Sorry. And I just want to say, and if you're not able to afford the stuff on those lists, don't be overwhelmed by that. Just have a conversation with the school social worker, because I know that there are many places out there that do have supplies for kids and for families. Do not be ashamed if you need to utilize that as well. That's what they're there for.
And along with those supply lists, which usually come in a packet, you're also going to get some information about school procedures, the code of conduct. You may get a form to sign about whether or not you're happy for your child's photo to be used on the school website, etc., etc. Do read the code of conduct. It's really important that both parents and children understand the code of conduct for the school. You'll have class assignment in late August, and then transportation is something that you want to be thinking about as well. Is your child going to be able to cope with the big bus, or do you need to be having a conversation about specialized transportation? And if they are going on the big bus, there are ways to prepare them for that as well, because obviously just explaining how it all works, the fact that the bigger children tend to sit at the back, maybe saying hello to the bus driver when they get on so that they're making a connection with the bus driver. All of that just smooths the way for the children. Okay, middle school changes, huge changes here. So now we're looking at, there may be a class visit, especially if your child's moving into a self-contained class in the middle school. They're going to be introduced to lockers. So that's something else that will require a conversation. Is your child able to use a locker? Are they going to feel comfortable using a locker? Is it going to slow them down getting from one class to another? They are going to be coming across some new classes, for example, HACS, and I cannot for the life of me remember what HACS stands for, but it's basically like home economics. So it's sewing and cooking and understanding about nutrition, that kind of thing. And there are tech classes. So these are things that are quite different to what they've experienced in elementary school. Obviously, they're going to have a new class every period, as opposed to being with the same teacher for most of the day. Students are going to have to use student ID and have that ID visible. They may have a study hall. So a discussion about what the purpose of study hall is and how you manage in study hall, and that will be very much again down to your individual student. I wish I'd had a conversation about study hall with my oldest child, because she is a rule follower as someone with autism, and she used to challenge everyone in study hall who wasn't studying. You can imagine how that went down. They're going to be changing for gym. Is that going to be an issue for your child? If it is, you need to have a discussion with the CSE team. There will be late buses. Is your child going to be comfortable getting the late bus? The late bus might not come to the bus stop. It may be further down the road. How are they going to navigate that? And are they going to take part in any extracurricular activities, excuse me, such as sports or after-school clubs? Oh, and there also may be school trips to think about as well, field trips, overnights. I know a lot of schools do an overnight for 8th grade as a way of recognizing that they're coming to the end of their middle school years. And then in high school,
Yeah, I can take over if you want me to.
Thank you. I need to get some water.
So the transition to high school, just like the transition to middle school, is that you really, it's important for your child to meet with the guidance counselor beforehand and start, maybe if they have some kind of an idea of the path that they want to choose for when they graduate and what they want to do, that they start having an availability to take some electives. And then there's going to be some more formalized exams, like that R word that, you know, wonderful New York State and California has, the Regents, if they're going to be taking that. Then there's the graduation pathways. There's different ways to graduate. And that's, and I know one of our members who's on here right now, Joyce Hawk, she gives some wonderful workshops about the different pathways for graduation. So that's a discussion that's going to happen with the guidance counselor at the high school. What testing accommodations or modifications your child will need. And this will happen, honestly, happens throughout elementary and middle school as well. There could be driver's ed, a career in tech. So many of the school districts have BOCES, that they have all these opportunities for kids to attend wonderful programs where they're learning a trade or a skill, and can take that on after high school as well. And then the slew of extracurricular activities that are available, whether it be sports, so athletics, music, clubs, there's a million, clubs, drama, all of those other things that your child might be interested in. It's important to really include your child and let them, allow them to have some kind of say in what they're exploring. So you can also help to ask certain questions and have what's needed on their IEP or 504 so they can still participate, because they have a right to do that. And that also goes for, like, this time of year. I just want to share with you, I know many, and anyone else can, you know, let me know if I'm wrong, but the PTSA, the PTSATs and the SATs kids are taking right now. And you have to sign up if you need certain accommodations or something like that beforehand. So it's important for your child to talk to the guidance counselor and ask for that if they think they need something, some kind of supports taking those exams.
I mean, if the school is on the ball, they will take care of that. They will approach you. Certainly with ours, they did it as soon as my son went into 9th grade. They had us sign the forms in case he needed the accommodations for the PSAT and the SAT. But again, it's something for you to be aware of in case the school is not on the ball, so that you can be asking for it. And another thing to be aware of is that there's like a smorgasbord of stuff available here when you're in high school. And there are things like prom and junior prom and all kinds of events coming up. One thing to bear in mind, and this has been a difficult one for me as a parent, is our children aren't necessarily going to have the same experience of high school as we had. And it may be okay with them that they're not having the same experience. So I would just warn against sort of pushing too hard, thinking, well, they should be doing extracurricular, this, that, and the other. They know their limitations. They may not want to do that. My son's a junior right now, and he still isn't particularly ready to do the extracurricular stuff in school. He finds it hard enough just getting through the school day and staying on top of his grades and doing his homework. He understands and acknowledges that it would be a good idea for him to have these extra things on his resume, but he's going to have to do it when he's ready and not to my timeline. So I just wanted to bring that up.
So I just want to say that Joyce did put something in the chat there about the requirements and pathways.
Yeah.
So so everybody can click that on. The other thing I want to share with you is I have a student that I advocate for who has a 504 and just recently found out that they're diabetic and it type 1 diabetes, so needs insulin and shots. And this particular student is extremely gifted in playing basketball and has been doing that. So with conversations with the school district and all the personnel involved, that at every practice as well as games, there's a school nurse that's available there to take this student's blood levels and to assist when needed. And that's really important. The only question that's not good to ask is not asking the question. It's important that you ask because you have a 50-50 chance of the answer being yes. But if you don't ask the question, you have a 0 chance of it being yes. So don't be hesitant to think something might not be able to happen just because it's never had in the past. It's important to make those pathways. So one of the things when you were talking about the proms is I never thought my daughter would ever go to a prom. Again, she's in a wheelchair, totally dependent, and the school that she was attending at the time, you know, had a prom, a first prom, and it was amazing. So don't ever hesitate to ask. And if your child's really interested in something, you know, ask the other people at the school, how can this happen, and bring it to the meeting.
Thanks, Renee. So questions you may want to ask at the CSE meeting, and remember, again, this is not an exhaustive list. It's just some ideas as to things that you might want to ask that might not always occur to people. So an explanation of how the school day works is incredibly important, especially if you have a child with executive functioning issues or autism. They need that information as far in advance as possible so that they can come to terms with it, understand it, talk it through with you. You need to ask about the different classroom settings in the school. Remember that the underlying principle of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is that the children will always be placed in the least restrictive environment. But it's important to know what the environment's going to be and what the other options are that are available in the school. If your child's going, say, into a 15-1-1 class, you want to know, is there an ICT class if they're doing really well that they can move into? Conversely, if they're not doing well, is there a 12-1-1 class or an 8-1-2 class that might be more appropriate to their needs? Being aware of the continuum of services in the school is important. And just coming back to what Renee was saying before, scope for inclusion. And it's an unfortunate fact that sometimes, especially if you have children in self-contained classes, they sometimes kind of get set to one side and forgotten in the mix. So an example might be there's an arts in education project going on in the school for 2 weeks, and it culminates in a big assembly where all the different classes are showing off what they've done. I have been aware of schools where the self-contained class has not been included in that assembly. They should be. So do ask about how are the children being included? How are they getting access to time with their neurotypical peers? What are the targets relating to literacy, numeracy, and study skills? What are they expecting your child to be able to do as they go into kindergarten? And what are they expecting them to be able to do by the end of kindergarten? You want to know about lunch and recess procedures. I've stood in schools in that first week of elementary school in September and watched kindergartners. Some of them were completely neurotypical and they still struggled with getting accustomed to the whole lunch system, the noise, the lining up, having to make choices if they're getting a school lunch. It can be overwhelming. Again, knowing as much in advance as possible is going to be really helpful. And something to bear in mind is, do you want your child to attend CSE meetings moving forward? 5 may seem very, very young. but it's not unheard of. There are some children that young that do go into CSE meetings. They don't stay for the whole time. They say hello, they get an introduction from everyone, they say how they think school's going, and they go out again. But if your child is up to it and only you know what works for your child, the earlier the better in terms of having them involved in the CSE process. So something else to think about. Now, we are not talking here about the technicalities of a CPSE to CSE meeting. That is a whole webinar in and of itself. There is one, WAIHD, where Joyce Hort works, which is the Westchester Institute for Human Development, runs some fantastic workshops on CPSE to CSE, and they have one scheduled on February the 13th at 10 a.m. So if that's something you want to know more about, I would strongly recommend that you try and register for that. That's February the 13th at 10 a.m. WIHD. You just need to look it up on their website.
So one of the things I just want to touch back, if you can go back to one screen, it's
Yep.
it's in reference to recess. So I think it's very important. Oftentimes I have parents that call me up, and I know the student that I'm advocating for, and there's a bunch of questions that's important to ask. So if your child's an elopement risk, it's extremely important to make sure that the seriousness of that is shared with the staff at the school. Also, and when I say an elopement risk, not just during recess, but on the bus, if they're a Houdini, if they're in a car seat and they can get out of it, if they're in need of a car seat because they're an elopement risk, all of these factors need to come up. And you should have the transportation department on speed dial on your phone, because it's all about communication. Anyone that's working with your child, you need to have some kind of communication and relationship with, so they know about your child, so there's no surprises. And I think that's one of the most important things with any of the transitions from any schools, and even afterwards, is forming those relationships with the people that are going to be in your child's life the moment you put them on the bus or you drop them off if you're driving them to school at the school.
Couldn't agree more. I think that's absolutely key, Renee. Okay, moving on to elementary to middle, and a note of caution, and this can happen at CPSE to CSE, and it can happen elementary to middle. A big fear a lot of parents have is that their children are going to be declassified, or they're going to have a reduction in their services. CPSE to CSE, one of the factors that I think is worth exploring, if it does look like they want to declassify your child, is that the testing that's used on children who are 4 and 5 years old is testing that is standardized across the entire population. That means it's standardized across the population to include students who haven't attended any preschool at all. So if your child has been in early intervention and then CPSE, they've had a heck of a lot of input that other children haven't had. And I personally think that could skew the results and make it look like they're doing better than they actually will be doing if you put them into a classroom with 20 other kids. So just something to bear in mind. And with elementary to middle school, you also want to be on the lookout for that suggestion. Oh, Johnny's done so well in 5th grade. It was fantastic. We think he can probably go into general ed classes in the middle school. What do you think, Mrs. Smith? Well, if Johnny is autistic, any child with autism is going to have significant issues with transition. And the transition from elementary to middle is often for autistic children the most traumatic one. So I wouldn't be looking to reduce any services there. Or if you have a child with ADHD executive functioning issues, they may have done pretty well in their 5th grade. Why? Because they've been in that school for 5-6 years. They are accustomed to the building. They know where everything is. They've been working with the same gym teacher for several years, same art teacher, same music teacher. They have been mainly in the same classroom. They know everybody. You take that child and you put them into a middle school, and suddenly a whole lot of issues can start to rear their head again. So those are certainly 2 scenarios in which I'd be very wary about any reduction in services. And in fact, what I would ask for, generally speaking, and I tend to recommend this to parents, is at this transition stage that you request a team meeting in October just to see how things are going, or even have team meetings written in for each quarter for the middle school, because you want to be on top of anything before it starts to become an issue. So a discussion about new class requirements is going to be something that you might want to have in your CSE meeting. Whether or not your child is going to be using the world language exemption. It used to be the languages other than something, LOTR, I think, oh, LOTE, language other than English. Now it's called the world language exemption. That is something that you can have if you have an IEP. Some schools, some districts don't mention it at all, and I've spoken to parents who are very upset because they feel that their child should have had that exemption and it was never brought up. Other districts have the conversation with you, and then some districts just automatically apply it. And again, that might not be appropriate to your child. Your child may want to study another language. It was automatically applied in our district, and my son did want to study another language. So that's a conversation that needs to be had. A discussion not just of locker use, but what the alternatives might be. And hopefully you're going to be with an open-minded school that is prepared to discuss alternatives for locker use, because it does not work for every child. How the cafeteria and recess system work. Again, this is on a much bigger scale. It can be extremely daunting for some children. The noise level in a middle school cafeteria is something else, not something I particularly want to walk into as an adult. What is going to happen if you've got a child with sound sensitivity? How are we going to accommodate that? What supports are available, and what's the communication chain in the middle school? By and large, your first point of contact is going to be the IEP manager. If your child has an IEP, they might be called the IEP teacher. But either way, there's going to be that main point of contact, and it isn't obviously going to be the classroom teacher like it was in elementary school. So you need to know who that is. You need to discuss physical education options. For example, if your child's going to have an issue with getting changed in front of other children, or just because of executive functioning challenges or physical or fine motor skill challenges, that's going to be difficult for them. Are they someone who's going to maybe need adaptive phys ed? Field trips and school functions also throw up all sorts of issues. That trip I alluded to before that a lot of schools do in 8th grade, where they go to Boston or they go to Washington and it's an overnight trip. You know, a lot of kids, again, on the spectrum, they don't necessarily have experience of sleepovers. They're not accustomed to sharing a room with somebody. This is something that, again, needs to come up for discussion. And at this point, if they're not already attending the CSE meeting, this is where we want to start encouraging student involvement in the CSE meeting. Renee?
So somebody had brought up that they thought that, you know, one of the guidance counselors or somebody on the team, you know, was very shocked that a student was at the meeting. And part of the reason why it is not very traditional for something like that to happen, I encourage pretty much all of my high school students to be at those meetings, and it's because it's their education. It's not their parents' education, it's their education. And however way, shape, or form they can be involved is important. But at the younger grades, there might be a lot there that's discussed that they will not really understand. And to be able to have them there just so there's a face to the IEP or the 504 is very important. So do what you're comfortable with, but be mindful to know that sometimes, how this is no easy way to say it, but oftentimes when you're talking about the supports that your child needs, it can be sounding negative, that your child needs this, 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 and this, or they use terms like doesn't do this, doesn't do this, doesn't do this. And that's why it's also important to always start with the strengths and to share the strengths and to ask that question if they don't ask it. Again, you just want to make sure that when you're transitioning, that you know beforehand and there's no surprises.
Yeah, and that point about student involvement in the meeting, at the very least by middle school, there should be if they're not coming into the meeting with you, you're at least having a long conversation with them about what you're going to be discussing, because it's no good putting a support in place if your child's not on board with it. And a classic example of that is a testing accommodation, which involves leaving the room where everybody else is having their test. There are a lot of teenagers who are not comfortable doing that. So if they haven't been prepared and warned and haven't had some practice with that, then they may not use that accommodation. Middle to high school, again, I mean, we talked about this at the beginning, the continuum of services available at those transition stages. We want to know what's available in the school. What if my child struggles, what's the next level of support? If they do really well, what can they be moving into in terms of classes? And we want an overview of the next 4+ years. We want to know what the credit options are. We want to understand what the plan is to hopefully get the child to graduation. And we absolutely have to increase the student involvement in the CSE meeting at this point. I think that gradual introduction where you start, if you can, in elementary school and you slowly increase their involvement is the best way to go. If it's an abrupt, you know, they've had nothing to do with the entire process all the way through their schooling and suddenly they hit 9th grade and it's like, well, you need to be in the meeting now and you need to speak for yourself. They're teenagers. What do you think they're going to do? A lot of them are going to just sit there with a stony face and give you monosyllabic answers. A question.
What I want to share about the involvement. I have students, again, these are students that are able to do this, that they fill a self-advocacy sheet that I share with parents and ask them to do it. And so they are able to share what their thoughts are about what the supports they might need, what they don't or do need, getting them familiar with this whole advocating for themselves. But the other part is if they're not comfortable sharing that at the meeting, somebody else can. I've done that for some of my students, that they're just there in person, but I'm sharing for them, or they don't want to be there. But I would never want to force a student to do that if they're not comfortable with it. But I think they need to understand that. I had a parent, I love learning from parents, especially students, but I had a student who told their parent that they wanted to carry around their 504 because, and this was absolutely fabulous, because there was a substitute teacher in one of the classes, and this student was not able to access something that was on the 504 because the substitute teacher really wasn't aware. And so that student thought for themselves to turn around and say, you know, I want to carry my 504 around and keep it in my binder just in case. That's a wonderful idea. And the same thing with an IEP. So just in case, because we all know that there are days, especially when they're in the older schools, in middle and high school, that all the different teachers that they might have, and there could be substitutes, or the teachers at a meeting, that's meeting time of year, and there will be a substitute. So, and you think, I never want to assume anything, that the classroom teacher is going to have the red flags up and say, these are the students that have 504s or IEP, please be mindful that they're allowed to access the bathroom if they need it. They need to go down to the nurse to get their levels checked, blah, 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 whatever. But any way that you can help your child to be independent is really important, because it avoids unnecessary stress for them as well, I think.
And then these final two questions, and I'm going to speed it up a little bit because we're 18 minutes past. I know this is due to finish at 7:30, but we want to be asking about this in that 9th grade meeting, in that 8th to 9th grade meeting. Don't wait until senior year to ask this, because again, we need to prepare ourselves. You know, I have worked with a family where the child's in 9th grade and they thought he was going to go to college at 18. He's not even going to be sitting regents, so he certainly isn't going to be leaving and going to college at 18. And that is a conversation that had not taken place. I don't know why, but it should have done. So what if my child isn't ready to graduate at 18, and what are the post-secondary options we're likely to be looking at? What's available? What supports are there? How can I help with the planning?
The person that you're going to want to ask those questions to is the school guidance counselor.
Yeah.
And they should also, the guidance counselors are really good that they have relationships with the people that are responsible for sharing information about Access VR, as well as OPWDD. So you can help your child to get the supports that they need, whether they're going to college or to a job right afterwards or to a trade school or anything like that.
Thanks, Renee. So we picked out, we found some real life experiences because we wanted to convey the fact that these are not, you're not being paranoid, you're not being ridiculous, and we all have legitimate worries and concerns. So this was from, it's just an extract from a blog where someone was writing about her fears about her daughter going into kindergarten. My biggest fear is that she'll be underestimated by others. Her speech and language delays, coupled with her shyness and anxieties, cause some people to get the wrong impression of her. When she doesn't respond immediately to prompts or questions, it is not usually because she doesn't understand. That's one of the fears I had with my kids. What can we do about that? Well, there's lots of things we can do. One thing you could do is you could produce a student summary sheet. This is an example of a student summary sheet. It's not intended to replace the IEP. It's intended to give the teacher just a little bit more information about your child that's easy for them to refer to, but it might just help with some of those issues that that particular parent was concerned about. And then if we look at moving into middle school, when my autistic son started junior high, I knew his experience would be nothing like mine. For months, I dreaded the first day of school. I had mini panic attacks thinking how the hell he would navigate going from class to class, bumping his way through crowded halls of rowdy kids, having multiple teachers who needed to learn his idiosyncrasies. What if he got lost? Would anyone help him? What if he had a meltdown? Would kids make fun of him? Now, there are things you can do about this. You can have a discussion with the school about those idiosyncrasies. Maybe they've come across them before. Maybe they have some tried and tested ways of supporting children with those particular behaviors that are peculiar to them. How do they help students that maybe have sensory issues or executive functioning issues with trying to move around the corridor? And how do we prepare the child? Well, one of the ways that you can do that is you can do social stories if it's an autistic child. This is just a couple of things that I found on the internet. If either you can use your own social stories book to create something, or if there's a teacher in the elementary school that's already doing this with your child, talk to them about some social stories. Sometimes the speech therapist can do this with your student, and see what's available online to help them as well. And then this one, and this is as it should be by this, by this stage, we're really moving away from the parent being in control of everything to the student being the person that's hopefully navigating the system and advocating for themselves. So the question of AP classes, the PSAT, the SAT, college admissions loomed ahead of me. I felt terrified. As a student with learning differences, tests were a nightmare. I felt like I was never correctly assessed. Tests were not built for my mind, so I never did well on them. I would get great grades in my classes due to my high levels of participation, dedication to homework and curiosity. But as soon as a test rolled around, I would score so low, it was as if I had not spent a second studying. So with this one, you're going to want to be talking as soon as possible if this is what your 8th grader is expressing about concerns about moving into middle school. You want to be developing a relationship with the guidance counselor. You want to be talking maybe to the psychologist about what can we do to boost her self-esteem and to maybe help her with some study skills that might, you're not going to like just overcome, for example, dyslexia with study skills. But again, we're talking sometimes about smoothing the way a little bit. And with a student in this situation, one of the things I would definitely be doing is I would be looking at the possible accommodations that you can have in a test situation. So I'm just going to pull these all up. I'm not going to read them all out. They will be in the...
Yeah, you know what, Fiona, for time reasons, I wouldn't read them all out.
No.
But I would just say to just everyone to look at that. And one of the things that I'd like to share is to make sure you talk with your child's teachers, and not just one teacher, all of them. So looking on report cards, one of the things I think is important for parents to do is when they're looking at the grade, to also look at the comments in the report card section, because sometimes that gives a wealth of information that your child might need some of these testing accommodations that are on here.
Yeah.
That you might not think about, and the child might not think about, and nobody is pointing it out to you. So to do that, and not to be afraid to ask for certain things. One of the workshops I co-presented last night was about accommodations, and Fiona mentioned earlier, please make sure that your child is comfortable with certain of those accommodations during test taking. And one of them is really leaving the room. There's certain accommodations that have to be done it can't be done in the same room as the other students for obvious reasons. If tests are read to them, or some of the other things that are on here. So just make sure that your child is comfortable with it. And also to know that there's certain factors that are involved in allowing for certain accommodations. So go in with the communication with all the people that are involved in that.
Thanks, Renee. I see there's a raised hand, but I'm going to whiz through to the end so that we've got space to answer your question and any others that come up. Okay, so good practice. This is really good practice for schools. So in terms of preparing for transition, what we would recommend is involving the student in the discussion about the transition, so you understand what their fears are, because some of those fears may be things that nobody's ever thought of, and they need to be talked through, and they need to be reassured. Involving the parent, again, the parent may have concerns and they may not seem relevant to maybe the teacher who only sees one side of the child, but the parent is part of that discussion, and it's really important. Collaboration and communication is absolutely key. And in an ideal world, what you would have is a lot more collaboration, unfortunately, than we get at the moment, between elementary and middle schools, between middle and high schools, so that there's that flow of information and understanding about what the students have experienced and what they're capable of and what their challenges might be. It's incredibly important for schools to acknowledge potential difficulties, fears, and anxieties. Don't just brush them aside. Try to create a safe environment, one in which the student knows and understands that when they get to middle school, they know exactly where to go if they're having a problem, that they can trust that there's someone they can talk to, and that the problem will be addressed. And just in recognizing the importance of having a good transition plan. If a school is proactive about this and recognizes that the challenges involved in transition can be greater for students with disabilities, then we're already halfway there.
So one of the things to be mindful of is to make sure you share with everybody what your child's interests, strengths, and what works for them in school. It's very important to formalize how communication is going to be happening. So I have parents who the teachers, especially the younger kids, many younger kids, they have texting they're able to do, or a once a week where there's a check-in that at least the parent knows, that one liner, oh, your child had, Susie had a good day today. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. Like my idea of a good day might not be a good day for the school. So how often is it going to happen? The frequency of it, who's going to be doing it? What method is it going to be? Is it going to be email? Is it going to be texting? Is it going to be a phone call? And you also want to let the schools know, whatever grade your child is in, that you want to make sure that if this happens, I want an immediate phone call, because we all know that we have our own children that there's certain things you need to know right at that very moment when it happens, especially kids that are in the higher grades. And I know many of the high schoolers carry their cell phones around, that if they're going to have access to that, and they are told by their child and not you that something happened, that's not going to be a good thing. And who's going to be the point person? So if your child has a concern or something happens throughout the day, who is that person that they could go to? And I always am an A person and then a B person, because somebody might be out or in a meeting. So they know that they have somebody they can go to if they need to.
Absolutely. So just a few bits of key information that every parent should know, and this is regardless, to be honest, of whether or not your child has a disability, and certainly regardless of the stage that you're at. So what is the communication system? What's expected? Is it, you know, if your child's got a new teacher and they're going into kindergarten, drop them a quick line. Is it better for me to text you, email you, phone you? How often is it okay to do that? I may be emailing you a lot in the first few weeks, just while my child settles in, giving them a heads up. Also, in terms of communication system, if you look at the district website, there should, on most district websites, be some sort of flow chart, which will say, in this situation, you need to talk to this person. In another situation, you talk to this person. So it might be the school nurse for one thing, it might be the guidance counselor for something else, it might be the classroom teacher for something else. And the flow chart will be set up so that if you don't get a satisfactory answer from that, you go to the next stage. But an awareness of how that system flows is important. Homework expectations, for example, how much time should be spent on homework? That is key information, especially if you have a child with a specific learning disability or executive functioning issues. You need to know how much time is expected for them to be spent on homework, because if they're spending twice as much time on that work every night, there needs to be a discussion. Why? Because the teacher is not getting an accurate picture of what the child is capable of, because they will assume that it has been done in 30 minutes, not in an hour. They will not know how much you have had to sit and cajole your child into doing that homework in the first place. So these things warrant additional conversations. As we said earlier, you need to know that school code of conduct. I have come across a case where a child has made a threat to a school, a serious threat involving a weapon, and the parent doesn't understand why he can't go back to the school. And yes, he has a disability, but nonetheless, this is one of those things where you're between a rock and a hard place, because that is a major breach of the school's code of conduct. What supports are available to you as a parent and to your child, and how to access them. And as Renee said, what's the main point of contact? And this will be in, obviously, because we're going to send you a copy of the PowerPoint, this is a useful piece of information. You will find a little variation on that, but generally speaking, that's about right in terms of how much homework they should be getting. One quick thing, there's a big fear, obviously, of that now there may be an increase in services. Your child may have a decrease in services, or they may get declassified, which is the big fear that everyone has. So you want to get your ducks in a row by asking questions early. So I would be asking questions at the end of 4th grade. Where do you see my child? What do you see them doing in 5th grade? Where do you see them by the time they get to middle school? Gather all pertinent data. So keep an eye on your child's reading, writing, how they're performing with homework, what their tests are. If they are having some anxiety about getting into school, you need to be recording that data, recording the date and what happened, and whether or not you managed to get them into school and what the issue was. Keep a really close eye on progress reports and report cards. They give you extremely important information, and I do think sometimes we overlook the importance of progress reports. And one of the questions that I will find myself asking a parent when their child is having a reduction in services is, well, were they achieving all of the goals on their progress reports? And 9 times out of 10, they can't answer me. You need to read those reports. Keep a record of how your child manages transition in general. You know, if you have a 4-year-old who struggles with leaving a social situation, like when you try and take him out of the playground at the local park, he kicks off and has a tantrum. If there's difficulty when you go to visit relatives or you go on vacation, you need to keep a record of these things, because this is likely to be a child who's going to have some difficulty with those transitions. And a big question to ask is, are skills embedded? And are they transferable? So you're telling me my child no longer needs an IEP because they have managed to close the gap. What's the evidence? And are they fully embedded? In other words, if my child goes into a different environment, will they still be able to do that? If they have a break over the summer, will they still be able to do that? And then last but not least, some very useful resources. And again, this is going to be in the handout. I'm just going to click on one, which is Starbridge. And this is actually a partner organization that we work with, but they have stacks of resources. They have webinars and instructional videos, for example, on all sorts of things. You can see there's one there, 2E, helping children thrive, 2E, helping students thrive. They have things like a list of the most up-to-date list of classifications, for example. Now,
that's very, that's very important. If you look at the New York State website is, looking at a needle in a haystack, and there's just so much stuff that's there that's outdated in the sense the language that they use. So it's important. Starbridge always usually has the up-to-date information. The New York State Transition Partners is another great, all these tips here. But when you go into any of these, if you click on any of these websites, there's a slew of other stuff there for you.
yeah.
So, and it's great because knowledge is power. So what you bring to the table, not for nothing, but sometimes you're going to bring information, not just about your child, but it might help other children in the school as well and benefit other kids.
Absolutely. I think that
I find that. And any way you can be involved is really important.
Yeah. And that's it. So if you have any questions, sorry, going back, I know Elizabeth had her hand up. Are we able to unmute Elizabeth, or can she unmute herself?
Yes, I have made it so that all members can unmute at this point.
My question was basically answered by Nancy, so I guess you can ask if somebody else has a question, we don't need to kind of repeat it.
Okay. Some of the questions were about Access VR.
Right. For Access VR, I would recommend attending a transition workshop that's specifically focused on high school and transition out of high school. Again,
Yes.
WIHD does fantastic workshops on that. What we were trying to do with this was really address all those other things that may be more peripheral, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, the transition workshops, what was the letters?
WIHD, Westchester Institute for Human Development.
Thank you.
If you look in the chat, Elizabeth, I don't know if it's still there. Joyce put something in there. I don't know if it was in the chat or it was something else. So some of the workshops that she can give. But you, again, ask, she just did it. Yep, she just put it in there. The events and calendar for WIHD. So one of the things though, to ask the school guidance counselor. So the student services, every school district has a different thing, but it's important to know what's available.
Thank you.
At this time, I want to please thank our speakers, Renee and Fiona, and thank you for your support of individuals with disabilities. And I'd also like to thank our closed captioner, Annette, for being here today. We will be sending out the link to the evaluation tomorrow, and it is in the chat as well. If you could please take that time to fill that out. And there will be some information in the evaluation. If you are interested in joining our task force, we are always looking for new membership. So there'll be a place on the form that you can express your interest, and we will get back to you. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And again, we will be sending out the link to the recording in the next couple of weeks. And tomorrow, the presentation will be emailed to you all. Have a great night.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.